Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bikes today.
Oh.
We're diving into Nikolai Gogol's Dead Souls. It's hilarious and unsettling.
Yeah, and readers have been kind of scratching their heads over it for centuries. Dead Souls is fascinating because it uses this strange premise, a guy going around buying records of dead serfs. But he uses that to explore some really big themes,
Okay.
like the absurdity of bureaucracy and the emptiness of the Russian elite. Also, the search for meaning in a chaotic world, and ultimately what it means to be Russian.
Right. So let's get into it. The story follows Chichikov, this charming but morally ambiguous dude. He travels across Russia buying these dead souls from these different landowners.
Yeah.
But why is he doing that?
Well, he's got a scheme, but it's kind of a mystery, at least for a good chunk of the book. And as you're going along with Chichikov, you encounter all these really vivid characters, these landowners, who are kind of like caricatures of human flaws and societal ills.
Oh, who?
Well, you've got Manilov the dreamer, who can't seem to get anything done.
Right.
Then there's Korobotchka, the stingy widow, who's obsessed with tiny profits.
Okay.
And Nozdrev, this impulsive gambler, always stirring up trouble.
Interesting.
And through all these encounters, Gogol paints a really satirical portrait of Russia in the 19th century.
Okay, so imagine you're bumping along in a carriage with Chichikov, traversing this vast Russian landscape. What do you think would strike you most about the people you'd meet?
Well, it's interesting because these characters are really exaggerated, but they're also recognizable. We've all met a Manilov, full of big ideas but lacking follow-through, or a Korobotchka, so focused on the details, they miss the bigger picture.
I see.
And that's what makes Gogol's satire so effective. It's rooted in reality, even when it veers into the absurd.
Yeah, it's like he's holding up a mirror to human nature, showing us our flaws in a way that makes us laugh, but also makes us squirm a little.
Exactly. And as the story unfolds, you start to see how Chichikov's ambition and his willingness to kind of exploit the system, it starts to warp him. He becomes almost a caricature himself, a symbol of this moral decay that Gogol sees spreading through Russia.
It's interesting, though. Gogol never actually condemns Chichikov. It's more like he just presents him to the reader and lets us draw our own conclusions.
Right. Gogol isn't interested in easy answers or moral absolutes. He wants us to think critically about the characters and their choices. And to consider how our own desires and ambitions might lead us astray.
Okay, so let's talk about some of these dead souls encounters in more detail. First up, we have Manilov, this landowner who's all charm and pleasantries, but he can't seem to accomplish anything.
Right.
There's this scene where Chichikov visits his estate, and Manilov keeps talking about all these grand plans, like building a bridge or creating this beautiful garden. But nothing ever comes to fruition.
Yeah, and that's exactly the point. Manilov represents this emptiness of the Russian elite, these people who are born into privilege, but lack any real substance or purpose. They're content to just live in this world of fantasy and empty gestures, while the real world crumbles around them.
It's kind of tragic in a way. You can almost feel sorry for him, because he seems genuinely oblivious to his own failings.
He is. He's a product of his environment. A system that rewards superficiality over substance. And Gogol uses him to expose the shallowness of this world, where social status and appearances are everything.
Then you have Korobotchka, this widow, who's so obsessed with tiny profits that she can't even grasp this whole concept of dead souls.
Yeah.
She haggles with Chichikov over the price, as if he's trying to sell her a sack of potatoes. It's hilarious.
Yeah.
But also kind of sad.
It is. Korobotchka represents this narrow-mindedness, this inability to see beyond her immediate concerns. She's so focused on holding on to what she has that she's blind to the bigger picture and the moral implications of her actions.
It's like she's living in this tiny little world,
Yeah.
and anything outside of it is just confusing and threatening.
Yeah. And Chichikov, with his smooth talk and his shady scheme, is a disruptive force in her carefully ordered existence.
It's a clash between two different ways of life, two different worldviews.
Exactly.
And Gogol uses this encounter to highlight the tension and anxiety that was simmering beneath the surface of Russian society at the time.
Remember, this was a period of immense change in Russia.
Yeah.
The country was grappling with the legacy of serfdom, the rise of capitalism, and the pressure to modernize. And Gogol, through his satirical lens, is capturing these societal shifts and their impact on individual lives.
So Korobotchka is like a symbol of the old guard, clinging to the past,
Yeah.
while Chichikov represents these forces of change, for better or worse.
That's true.
And in many ways, this tension is still relevant today, as we grapple with rapid technological advancements and societal upheavals.
Absolutely. The themes of tradition versus modernity, the allure of wealth and power, and the struggle for meaning, these are all timeless and universal, and that's why Dead Souls continues to resonate with readers centuries after it was written.
Okay, so we've talked about Manilov and Korobachka. Next up, we have Nozdrev, this impulsive gambler and liar.
Oh, Nozdrev.
He's a force of chaos,
Nah.
always up for a bet, a drink, or a good story,
Yeah.
even if that story is completely fabricated.
It's fascinating because he's so full of life, but it's a life that's ultimately destructive. He's driven by his passions and his impulses, and he has no regard for the consequences of his actions.
Remember that scene where he almost gets into a duel with Chichikov
No.
over a card game?
Oh, yeah.
It's completely absurd, but it also reveals something about his character. He's willing to risk everything, even his life,
Yeah.
for the sake of a thrill.
And Gogol uses Nozdrev to explore the dangers of living solely for pleasure. For the moment, he's a cautionary tale, a reminder that unchecked passions can lead to ruin.
And yet there's something almost endearing about Nozdrev. He's so full of energy, so larger than life, that you can't help but be drawn to him, even as you recognize his flaws.
He embodies this Russian spirit of excess, this tendency to go all in, whether it's drinking, gambling, or telling tall tales.
Right.
And while Gogol clearly sees the danger in this behavior, he also seems to admire its vitality, its sheer audacity.
It's like he's saying, yes, this is dangerous, but it's also part of what makes us human, part of what makes life interesting.
Right. And that's what makes Gogol such a complex and compelling writer. He's not just a satirist, he's also a keen observer of human nature.
Yeah.
And he's able to capture both the beauty and the ugliness of the human experience.
Okay, so we've met the dreamer, the penny pincher, and the impulsive gambler. Who's next on our Dead Souls road trip?
Well, next we encounter Sobakovich. He's probably the most materialistic character in the book. He sees everything and everyone in terms of their monetary value.
Really?
Even the food he eats is described in terms of its cost.
Yeah.
And its practicality.
He's like the ultimate capitalist,
Yeah.
even before capitalism really took hold in Russia. And his interactions with Chichikov are some of the funniest in the book, because they're basically haggling over the price of dead souls, as if they were livestock.
Remember that scene where they're discussing the merits of different types of dead souls?
Yeah.
Sobakovich boasts about the strength and hard work of his deceased serfs, as if they're still valuable commodities, even in death.
It's so absurd. But it also highlights this underlying theme of commodification, the way human beings are reduced to their economic value.
Exactly.
And Gogol seems to be suggesting that this trend, which was emerging in his time, is a dangerous one.
Sobakovich represents this growing materialism, this focus on profit and acquisition,
Right.
that Gogol saw as a threat to the soul of Russia.
And in many ways, this critique is even more relevant today, as we navigate a world dominated by consumerism and the pursuit of material wealth.
Absolutely.
It makes you wonder, what would Gogol think of our modern world, with its obsession with smartphones and social media, and the constant pursuit of stuff?
It's an interesting question, and one that I think he would have a lot to say about. Gogol was a keen observer of human nature, and he was deeply concerned about the corrupting influence of materialism and the loss of spiritual values.
Yeah.
So I imagine he would have a field day satirizing our modern-day obsessions.
I can just picture him writing a scene where Chichikov is trying to buy up likes and followers on social media, or negotiating the price of a virtual reality experience.
That's a brilliant image, and it speaks to the enduring power of Gogol's satire.
Yeah.
His characters and situations may be specific to 19th century Russia, but the themes he explores are timeless and universal.
Right.
We can all relate to the desire for status, the fear of loss, and the search for meaning in a world that often feels meaningless.
So after Sobakovich, we have one more Dead Souls encounter to discuss before we wrap up part one, and this one is perhaps the most disturbing of all.
Yes, we're talking about Plushkin, the miserly hoarder who lives in squalor, despite his vast wealth. His estate is described as a decaying wasteland, filled with broken furniture, rotting food, and piles of useless junk.
It's like the ultimate cautionary tale about the dangers of greed and obsession.
Yeah.
He's so consumed by the need to acquire and hoard possessions that he's lost all connection to the world around him, to the people in his life, and even to himself.
And what's particularly disturbing about Plushkin is that he wasn't always like this. He was once a prosperous landowner, a loving father, and a respected member of the community. But his obsession with saving and hoarding eventually consumed him, turning him into a grotesque caricature of his former self.
It's like he's become a living ghost,
Right.
a dead soul in his own right.
Right.
And his encounter with Chichikov is both comic and deeply unsettling, because it reveals the depths of his depravity and the hollowness at the heart of his existence.
Plushkin represents the ultimate perversion of the human spirit.
Okay.
The way our desires can twist and warp us, turning us into something less than human. And Gogol uses him to explore the dark side of human nature, the destructive potential of greed, and the corrosive effects of isolation.
And it's interesting to note that Gogol himself struggled with hoarding tendencies in his own life. He was notoriously meticulous and anxious about his possessions, and he reportedly saved every scrap of paper he ever wrote on.
That's right. And this personal connection to the theme of hoarding adds another layer of complexity to Plushkin's character.
Yeah.
It suggests that Gogol wasn't just satirizing others, but also confronting his own demons, his own struggles with materialism and obsession.
It's like he's saying, look at this character. Look at what he's become. It could happen to any of us.
Right.
And that's what makes Gogol's satire so powerful. It's not just about pointing fingers at others. It's about recognizing our own potential for darkness and holding ourselves accountable for our choices.
And that's what makes Dead Souls such a challenging and rewarding read. It's a book that forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world we live in. And it's a book that continues to resonate with readers centuries later because it speaks to those timeless questions about the nature of humanity and the search for meaning in a chaotic and often absurd world.
So as we wrap up part 1 of our deep dive into Dead Souls, I'm left with a sense of both amusement and unease. Gogol has introduced us to this cast of unforgettable characters, these dead souls who represent the flaws and follies of Russian society. And he's left us wondering what will become of Chichikov and his scheme. And what does this all say about the state of the Russian soul?
Good questions. Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll explore the unraveling of Chichikov's carefully constructed world and delve into the deeper themes of guilt, redemption, and the search for meaning that lie at the heart of Gogol's masterpiece.
Sounds good.
Picking up where we left off Chichikov's writing high, he's amassed this collection of dead souls, and he's feeling pretty invincible, like he's got the system all figured out.
Yeah, he's got these grand plans to use the souls as collateral for a loan, buy a huge estate, and basically become this big shot landowner.
Right.
He even starts to daydream about settling down, starting a family, and becoming a pillar of society, all thanks to his little scheme.
But Gogol being Gogol throws a wrench into the works.
Oh.
Chichikov's carefully constructed world starts to crumble.
How?
It all starts at a fancy ball thrown by the governor.
Okay.
So picture this. Chichikov's at this ball, surrounded by all the important people, feeling like he's finally made it, and then, boom, rumors about his dead soul scheme start spreading.
Oh, no.
Like wildfire.
What happens?
It's amazing how Gogol captures that feeling of social paranoia, the way rumors can just twist and distort reality, creating this atmosphere of suspicion and unease.
Right.
Word gets around, people start whispering, and suddenly Chichikov's not the charming businessman anymore.
I see.
He becomes the subject of gossip, speculation, side-eye glances.
You can almost feel the walls closing in on him.
Yeah, his carefully crafted facade starts to crack, and we see glimpses of the insecure, anxious man hiding underneath.
It's like watching a house of cards collapse.
It is. It's a brilliant commentary on the fragility of social status. It reminds us that these carefully constructed identities we build for ourselves, they can crumble in an instant.
And for Chichikov, this public downfall is a major turning point.
Right.
He goes from this confident schemer to a desperate man trying to salvage his reputation.
Yeah, he's scrambling to control the narrative. But the harder he tries, the worse it gets. It's like watching a train wreck in slow motion.
And Gogol doesn't hold back. In showing us the darker side of Chichikov's nature,
No, he doesn't.
he becomes increasingly manipulative,
Right.
even ruthless, as he tries to escape the consequences of his actions.
But the more he struggles, the more he reveals his true character.
So it's not just social ruin he's facing.
No.
The authorities get wind of the rumors, and things escalate quickly.
Yeah, suddenly he's facing accusations of fraud, forgery, and even worse crimes.
Talk about a fall from grace.
Chichikov's arrested, thrown in jail, and his dreams of wealth and status just evaporate. He's stripped of everything, his possessions, his social standing, his carefully crafted persona. It's a complete and utter humiliation.
It's kind of hard to feel sorry for him at this point.
I know. I mean, he did bring this on himself.
Right.
But there's a glimmer of something else emerging here amidst all the chaos.
What's that?
This dramatic downfall forces Chichikov to confront himself, to face the emptiness at the heart of his ambition. He's lost everything he thought he wanted, and he's left with nothing but his own thoughts and regrets.
So there he is, sitting in jail, facing the consequences of his actions. What happens next? Does he just give up?
Well, this is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Enter Morozov, this wealthy landowner who's been observing Chichikov's downfall. Now, Morozov is a complex character, a man of principle. Disgusted by the corruption he sees all around him.
Okay.
He believes in honesty, hard work, doing things the right way.
So he's like the anti-Chichikov.
Exactly.
What does he do?
Here's the twist. Morozov sees potential in Chichikov, even in his darkest hour.
Really?
Yeah, he visits him in jail and offers him a way out, a chance to redeem himself.
Wow.
He tells Chichikov to renounce his ill-gotten gains, embrace a simpler life, and he promises to help him get back on his feet.
That's a pretty radical proposition. Do you think Chichikov is even capable of change at this point?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
And this is where Gogol leaves us hanging.
Oh, come on.
Because he famously burned the second part of Dead Souls.
What?
We never find out what Chichikov decides.
That's so frustrating.
I know, but think about it. This unfinished symphony actually makes the book even more thought-provoking.
How so?
It forces us to grapple with the ambiguity, the uncertainty.
Okay.
It invites us to imagine our own ending, to decide for ourselves whether Chichikov chooses redemption or continues down a path of deceit.
I see your point. It's like Gogol is saying, here's the story, now you decide what it means.
Precisely.
And the fact that he burned the second part adds another layer of complexity.
Yeah, was he dissatisfied with it? Was he making a statement about the impossibility of true redemption in a corrupt world? Or maybe he was simply a victim of his own inner demons? We can only speculate.
But even without a resolution, the journey we take with Chichikov is incredibly powerful.
It is.
We see him rise and fall, experience moments of both brilliance and utter foolishness, and ultimately we're left to ponder those big questions about morality, ambition, and the meaning of life itself.
And speaking of Gogol's brilliance, let's take a moment to appreciate how he uses language to create this incredibly immersive experience for the reader.
Yeah, his descriptions are so vivid. Like, remember how he describes Plushkin's decaying mansion?
Oh, yeah.
He uses words like corpse, monument to decay, mold, dust, cobwebs, to paint this picture of utter neglect and stagnation.
It's almost like you can smell the mustiness and feel the weight of time pressing down on you.
It's amazing how he does that with words.
He's a master of imagery and metaphor. And he doesn't just use language to describe physical settings.
Okay.
He also uses it to reveal the inner lives of his characters, their thoughts, feelings, motivations.
I see.
Remember that scene where Chichikov is reflecting on his scheme?
Yeah.
Gogol describes his thoughts as a swarm of bees buzzing in his head, perfectly capturing that feeling of anxiety and chaotic energy.
He really gets inside the heads of his characters.
He does.
You feel like you're right there with them, experiencing the world through their eyes.
Exactly. And he's also a master of humor and irony.
Right.
His tone can shift effortlessly from satirical to poignant to absurd, keeping you constantly engaged and never quite sure what to expect next.
It's like he's playing with you, the reader, making you laugh 1 minute and then confronting you with something deeply unsettling the next.
Right.
It keeps you on your toes.
And I think it's important to remember the historical context here.
Okay.
Gogol was writing during a time of great social and political upheaval in Russia. The country was struggling to modernize, to find its place in the world. And there was a lot of debate about the best path forward.
So Dead Souls isn't just a funny story. It's also a reflection of the anxieties and uncertainties of that time.
Absolutely. Dead Souls reflects that sense of unease, that feeling of being caught between the old and the new.
Right.
Gogol is holding up a mirror to Russian society, exposing its flaws and hypocrisies, but he's also expressing a deep love for his country and a hope for its future.
So he's both criticizing and celebrating Russia at the same time.
Exactly. And that's what makes Dead Souls so powerful. It's not just a satire, it's also a love letter to Russia, a complex and nuanced portrait of a nation in transition.
And even though it was written almost 200 years ago, it still resonates with us today.
Absolutely. The themes it explores, identity, ambition, the search for meaning, these are all timeless and universal.
Right.
We're still grappling with many of the same issues that Gogol was writing about. Corruption, inequality, the allure of material wealth, and the struggle to find our place in a rapidly changing world.
It's a book that stays with you long after you finish reading it.
It does.
And it keeps you thinking about these big questions.
And that's the mark of a true masterpiece. Dead Souls is one of those rare books that transcends its time and place, offering us a glimpse into the human condition that is both insightful and deeply moving.
So we've journeyed with Chichikov. We've met this cast of unforgettable characters, and we've explored the rich tapestry of themes that Gogol weaves together, but there's still so much more to uncover. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Dead Souls, I can't help but think about the ending, or rather, the lack of one, burning the second part. What a bold move by Gogol, leaving us hanging like that without a resolution.
Incredibly frustrating, but also brilliant.
Yeah.
I mean, that missing second part has become this literary enigma, this blank canvas. Readers have been projecting their own interpretations onto it for centuries.
What do you think would have become of Chichikov?
Who knows?
Would he have found redemption? Would Russia itself have found a path forward?
It's impossible to say for sure.
We'll never know.
But it's like Gogol's inviting us to become co-authors, to grapple with these big questions ourselves and to imagine our own endings.
Kind of fill in the blanks.
Exactly. It reminds us that life itself is often messy and unresolved.
Yeah.
Full of loose ends and unanswered questions, and maybe that's okay.
Maybe so.
Yeah.
One thing that struck me about Dead Souls was Gogol's portrayal of Russia. It's kind of a love-hate relationship, isn't it?
It is.
He's critical of the country's flaws, like its backwardness.
Right.
But there's also this deep affection there.
Yeah.
This sense of longing and connection that you feel throughout the whole narrative.
There's that one passage where Gogol directly addresses Russia. It perfectly captures that complicated relationship.
Oh, yeah. What does he say?
He writes, "Ah, Russia, Russia, from my beautiful home in a strange land I can still see you. In you, everything is poor and disordered and unhomely." But then he goes on to say, "Yet what secret, what invincible force draws me to you? Why does there ceaselessly echo and re-echo in my ears the sad song which hovers throughout the length and the breadth of your borders?"
It's beautiful. He's acknowledging Russia's problems, but also expressing this deep connection to the land and its people.
Right, a connection that goes beyond logic or reason.
Gogol saw the beauty and potential of Russia, even amidst all the poverty and corruption.
And I think that's what makes Dead Souls so powerful.
Yeah.
It's more than a satire. It's a love letter to a country that's trying to figure out its identity and its place in the world.
And that struggle for identity is something we can all relate to, no matter where we're from or what time period we live in.
Absolutely. We're all trying to figure out who we are, where we belong, what it all means.
And that's why Dead Souls still speaks to us today.
Exactly. It tackles these universal themes: ambition, greed, the search for meaning, the complexities of human nature.
In a way that's both timeless and deeply relevant to our own lives.
It truly is.
So we've talked about the characters,
Yeah.
the themes, and Gogol's incredible use of language. But what do you think is the ultimate message of Dead Souls? What was Gogol trying to say?
That's the big question, isn't it? I don't think there's one easy answer. Dead Souls is a book that resists simple interpretations. But I think one of the key takeaways is the importance of self-awareness.
Okay.
Gogol is urging us to look inward, to really examine our own motivations and desires, and to be wary of the corrupting influence of ambition and greed.
Like he's saying, don't become a Chichikov. Don't let your desire for wealth and status consume you.
Exactly. But I think he's also urging us to look beyond the surface, to see the humanity in others, even in those who are flawed or misguided. Remember even Chichikov. For all his scheming and deception, he has those moments of vulnerability and even a glimmer of hope for redemption.
It's a good reminder that we're all complex creatures, capable of both good and bad.
And ultimately, it's up to us to choose our path.
I think you're right. And ultimately, Dead Souls is a call to action.
Yeah.
It challenges us to examine our own lives, our own societies, and to strive for something better, something more meaningful than chasing wealth and status.
It is.
Well, that's it for our deep dive into Dead Souls. Thanks for joining us. We hope you found it insightful and thought-provoking.
Until next time, happy reading.